All right, I'm going to take the themes that we have been talking about here, terrorism and what the media reports and what it doesn't report. I'm going to put it together here for the last video. I did a film called We Ride to DC a few years back, and it was all about how it is that the media does not report the news that you need to see and hear. That being said, here's a clip from my film. It's about dry runs taking place in the air, of all places, to Orlando. Take a look.
A flight bound for Florida that some airline pilots say appeared to have been used as a dry run for terrorists.
They're going to try it again. 100%. If a dry run's occurring, the attack is shortly following.
The flight left Reagan International Airport headed for Orlando International. Crew members say that shortly after takeoff, a group of 4 Middle Eastern men caused a commotion. The witnesses claim one of the men ran from his seat and coach toward the flight deck door. He made a hard left and entered the forward bathroom, quote, for a considerable length of time. While he was in there, the other 3 men proceeded to move about the cabin, changing seats, opening overhead bins, and, quote, generally making a scene. Both U.S. Airways and TSA confirmed the incident. The TSA told us the matter requires no further investigation at this time.
They're liars. They're flat-out liars.
This federal air marshal says several flights he has worked have been the targets of dry runs. And while until now there has been absolutely no publicity about the U.S. Airways flight from D.C. to here at Orlando International Airport, airline security experts say incidents like this should not and cannot be ignored.
It's not a question of if, it's a question of when.
It certainly is a question of when. Tom, I'm going to start off with you for the sake that when you were in the NYPD, were there a lot of scares that took place that the American people, or at least New Yorkers, never knew about because it was kept sort of quiet, no reason to panic people? We stopped it.
There were investigations that took place that potentially could have turned into something that were closed or were left to be monitored at a later date. But would it scare people? Listen, every single day, the New York City Police Department and police departments around this country receive threats relative to things that they check out that turn out to be nothing. In this video, I'm not so sure that the U.S. government didn't do anything. I know that if I was in charge of the air marshals and I saw this report come across my desk, I would put more air marshals on those flights. Now, if they're testing it, then we have the ability now to look into these people's backgrounds. We don't know that a joint terrorist task force didn't follow some of these people for a while after the fact. You have to give valid ID now to get on a flight, which gives the U.S. government and government authorities more ability to track you at a later date. We don't know if no investigation didn't go on just because some air marshal wasn't apprised of that something didn't happen after he was on the flight.
Okay, I don't know if you're privy to this information. I don't even know if you're allowed to share it or not. But when you take a look, and again, this is just a big scope of things, when you take a look at all those investigations that you're talking about, were the majority of them people from Middle Eastern descent? Not
back in my day, but it's long before we were so attuned. Remember, I got out in '99.
Okay.
So it was before,
right before
the 2001 bombing.
Right.
There were, I would say there was a share of them, but not to the abundance that we see now, with everyone fine-tuned to watching people and watching exactly what they do.
Misty, when it comes to racial profiling, right? Because I believe in calling a spade, right? And right now, the people who are from the Middle East, who believe in the parts of the Quran that say that you would be better with your head chopped off, they're here. They're traveling here. They're here, whether they're coming through the border, they're coming on a visa, they're coming to visit Disneyland, they're coming here. From the sense of racial profiling, how much, I don't know the word I'm looking for, how vulnerable are airlines, or how vulnerable are we as a society to do that racial profiling from a legal perspective?
From a legal perspective, especially from a civil penalty perspective, racial profiling could be considered to be discriminatory. And you will, no question, see whether you agree with the law or not. Somebody who feels that they've been discriminated against based on their race, religion, will bring claims against anyone and everyone who's a viable defendant. Now, that being said, it makes companies, it makes airlines, it makes them squeamish because they're faced with potential of millions of dollars in damages in a civil lawsuit. And that's why it's very difficult. It's a hard line to toe as a business owner, as a corporation, as an employer, how to handle these types of situations.
There are ways to get around it because you remember the whole NYPD surveillance program. So the point is there's civil rights, there's equal protection. You cannot discriminate on someone just because they are Muslim, right? But if there are other criteria that, for example, the suspicious activity that was taking place on the plane, you can use that to get around equal protection. You don't have to just solely say, I'm detaining this person because they're Muslim. Obviously, that wouldn't fly, and nobody would detain someone just because they're Muslim.
Right, but let me just make the point that it takes about $200 and a plaintiff's attorney to walk into a courthouse and file a complaint. And now, no matter whether you're right or wrong on the law, you're defending that claim $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 to defend it.
So what? We have people on retainer in the corporation councils.
Oh, no, you're paying.
It's a difference if it's a company versus government.
Absolutely.
Government has a little bit more of a leeway to target someone based on information.
But this is governed by the FAA.
Yesterday, I'm coming through Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. I'm flying back to New York. There were 2 Muslim ladies with the garb and everything else.
Were they full burqa?
Almost full burqa. A TSA handler with a dog is walking through the line, and the dog targets the woman. And won't leave her, and targets the second woman with her. And not telling tales out of school, sits down. That means she's now a target. That dog is now targeted, and there's something about her. The TSA agent, not the dog handler nods to the agent. The other agent comes over and starts questioning them. They pulled them out of the line, and they were going to do a full comprehensive check of their stuff. I'm sure that they did the swabs and everything else. I didn't stick around. I had to make a flight. But the bottom line is the dog is blind to race, religion. It just knows how it was trained. And something on that woman targeted the dog to her to the point where it targeted and identified her as a potential target.
See, now I
don't have a problem.
Wow, man, you just trapped me with that story because, when I was at Disney recently, we were walking around Epcot Center, and it was at Christmas time, Christmas carols all over the place, and women in full burqa walking through, and I can't tell you how uncomfortable I was because I know nobody is checking underneath that stuff. When you go to Disney, they check in your purse, they check in your bag, and it stops. Nothing's being checked on that. And we just had the guy from CARE, right? The people from CARE, the Council of American Islamic Relations, says, hey, listen, if they give you a hard time at the TSA, you push back.
Right.
We're not gonna stand for this. Right. I mean, I have a real problem with this. I mean, does anybody here, maybe I'm going too far with my question, but do we have the right to tell her, take that off?
Well, they're doing full body checks. So that's being done at airports. If you're talking about airports, if you're talking about somebody walking around in a public place, listen, our trains aren't being checked. Anyone can get onto a train. Anyone can go through the Midtown Tunnel or on the bridges.
Then maybe we have to look at different ways to protect Disney World and Disneyland and those type of facilities. And maybe it's time for dogs to start sniffing out because a dog is blind.
All right, but now let's extrapolate on what you just said there. Disneyland, right? So we know that this terrorist was in Orlando, was looking at Disneyland, and they're picking this flight to go to Orlando. And I'll tell you why I think they are. My contention has always been, and it was in my movie, that I believe that the Islamic terrorists, and I got this from Giuliani, he says, the problem with having another 9/11 is that they always have to upstage the one they did before. So how do you take down 2 buildings? We don't have 2 other buildings to take down. It's going to be very hard to replicate that. And I said, no, Rudy, you're wrong. The way you do that, the way you make it worse than 9/11 is you take out Disneyland, where all it is kids. It doesn't matter whether or not it was so many people there or not. Just the fact that you got all kids. Look at the way you brought up earlier in the day, right? You're getting chills again thinking about it, how we brought up Sandy Hook. You have an airplane crash into Disney?
Or the Mall of America or something.
Yeah, but even just the point of Disney. Disney is America.
Correct.
Right? If you're going to say to somebody,
that this is even that people are even hearing this, because I hope nobody gets an idea from this, because that is disgusting.
The terrorist the other day, from what they know, he went to see Disney, and it was between Disney and Pulse, is the way the media seems to reporting it.
It's a terrifying prospect, and it requires more security and just more security at a place like Disney.
But that comes to a cost and a cost
There's no
factor.
cost. What's the cost you put on lives? Tom, I'll tell you right now.
I'm not saying.
If
I'm
a
not
Martian,
I'm not saying I would put a cost on it, but Disney definitely does, and so do other corporations.
if somebody from another planet came down and said, "I want you to show me the nicest place on earth," I'd take them to Disney, right? So what is Islamic terror about? It's about
Coney
hate. In Coney Island. What is it? It's about hate. Right? So that's where you attack. So you get that they're doing these dry runs here. We're so vulnerable to it. And when I see these women in full burqas, knowing how they're checking people in, I have a huge problem with that.
But when you say something like that, I think to myself, I want to know who those people were on that dry run. I mean, I understand that there needs to be some confidentiality so that law enforcement can do the job, but also there's a catch-22 because I want to know whether, law enforcement is doing their job correctly.
All right, guys, I have to wrap up with that. We're out of time. I want to thank again everybody here on the panel. You guys do a great job every week. I appreciate it. Tell us what you think of the show. Send me an email, dmlreport@newsmax.com, or you can send it to me at theycometoamerica@gmail.com. We read them all. Can't respond to them all. Until Monday, God bless you, America, and our troops. Good night.